Welcome to the nextTalk podcast. We are a nonprofit passionate about keeping kids safe online. We're learning together how to navigate tech, culture, and faith with our kids. Recently, I was talking to a mom, and she said to me, I am so worried about my kid. Something is really off. And then after she said that, she went off to describe some details and some stuff like that. But it got me thinking, and it honestly took me back to some days when my kids were younger and as they were growing up, and especially during the early teenage years. And I thought maybe I could address that. One of the things I want to say, first of all, is if you feel like something's off with your child, don't ignore it. You're the parent. You know this kid more than anyone other than God. So don't ignore it. But also, we do need to be careful. First of all, before we get into this, I want to say this parent was not telling me things like self-harming or suicide. I wasn't worried about this child hurting themselves. So if that's the case, and you're worried about that, you need to immediately seek a counselor, seek a pediatrician, a medical doctor, and get the medical experts involved. I'm simply talking to you as a mom today. So when I would start being panicked about maybe some things I was seeing in my kids, like her comment kind of took me back to those days, and I really wanted to address it. So first of all, though, I wanted to talk about that disclaimer with the, self-harming. If they're hurting themselves, obviously medical professionals immediately. I'm talking about stuff like they have more attitude than normal. Their style of clothes has changed. Their friend group has changed. Something that you're concerned about. You think that there's a step in a different direction that you're like, wait a minute, what is this? So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about on this show. Simple things. But as I say all of those, we're probably all thinking, that's all of our teenagers. Right? Their style does change. They do have attitude. Their friend groups will change and evolve. So when is it like a red flag that we need to dig into? And when is it just, normal teenage stuff that they're going through? When this mom and I were dialoguing and she said this to me, and my mind kind of went back to some moments in my own parenting journey, one of the things that I remembered was this. A counselor told me one time, I remember I was on the couch, crying and worried about my kids, and this is happening and that is happening. And I remember her saying, Mandy, you are at a chapter 10 and your kid is at chapter 3. And that has just really had an impact on me for many years of being a mom, because I think that's what often happens. In the world we live in, kids can get radicalized very easily, where they just get zoned in on this one ideology or this path, and it's easy to do that because of social media and how divisive everything is. And so I think one of our greatest fears as parents is we just don't want our kid getting radicalized on anything, and I'm talking like politics, thought processes, any kind of hate group or hate thought that's out there in the world. We don't want our kids to get radicalized with that. And so oftentimes I think what happens is our kid, changes their clothing, or they make a statement just to see how we're going to respond. That may be different than how they've been brought up, or it may challenge the narrative in the home. And I think what happens is so many times our kid is just at chapter 3. They've just heard about this from somebody online, and they're just throwing it out at the dinner table to see what our response is going to be. But in our mind, we're at chapter 10. They're radicalized. We've lost them. They're going down a bad path. So there's all sorts of things that can trigger this chapter 10 response in us. So for example, we could be worried about radicalization generally, but what they're saying we could have experience with this from our past that we haven't healed from. And it just triggers us. And we go back to when we were a teen and we're like, oh my gosh, no, my teen's not going to do that. My teen's not going to follow in my footsteps. Sometimes what's happened is you've already walked a difficult road with your kid and they've come out of that on the other side. But then you see a sign and it triggers you and you go to chapter 10 again. We're back here again. I tell you all this because I never want you to ignore warning signs in your child's life. But also, I don't want you to rush to panic mode. Because sometimes they're just throwing something out there that they want us to respond to. So if you do see changes in attitude, if you do see changes in dress, changes in friend group, things like that, a couple things that I would recommend. One, try to ask about it in a curious way instead of an accusatory way. So we don't want to inject shame or project that they're making a wrong decision, but we do want to ask and be curious about why they're hanging out with this new group of people now, or tell me about your new friend, that you seem to be hanging out with a lot. So just engage with them in dialogue, but in a way that is not shameful, not you being mad at them. This should be a calm, logical conversation where you are just curious and trying to understand what they're thinking. The other thing is this, I'm really big on random phone checks and I have a podcast on that. I can link that for you, but check their phone, check their devices. With random phone checks too, I was very honest with my kids when they earned phones that I'm going to be able to check it at any time. And when they were younger and just had gotten a phone, there were moments when I would be like, hey, give me your phone. It's time for a random phone check. And I would do that. As they got older, I hadn't found anything that they hadn't already told me about, which is awesome. But as they had gotten older, I stopped doing that and just saying, hand me your phone. And I would just check it randomly at night to kind of see, I didn't really make a big deal about it, but I was just making sure they were safe. And if I ever would have seen anything that was a red flag that they didn't tell me about, then, that's a concern. And so when I say you may be noticing different things in your kid's life, check the phone. Because a lot of times their online influencers have changed. They may have found a different algorithm. They clicked on one too many videos and now it's sent them down a spiral. And that may be what you're noticing. Always check online and make sure there's nothing happening there that's dangerous or that you need to be worried about. So obviously, do random phone checks. Make sure there's not anything going on in the phone that could maybe be influencing this new behavior or these new decisions that you're finding with your kid. The other thing is just always kind of have a temperature of who is influencing your kids, right? Who's their favorite YouTuber? Who's their favorite social media influencer? What's their favorite show that they're watching? Netflix series or whatever. What's their favorite movie? Those sorts of things are great to kind of just check the temperature of the things that your kid is interested in and the information that your kid may be receiving in. So those are all great things. At the end of the day, though, with this mom, she started with this and it just rang so many. When she said it, it just reminded me of so many instances through the years of me as a mom, going to chapter 10 when my kid was at chapter 3, but I got overly panicked and I spiraled. In this world of information that we live in, that we hear about so many dangers with kids all day long. And I mean, I'm in this work, but even if you're scrolling through your social media, you see all of this. It's really easy for us to jump ahead and really get panicked about what our kids are saying or doing, or maybe a new behavior, but we're noticing. And I certainly do not want you to brush it under the rug or ignore it. So at the end of the day, it's just really important that we don't go crazy mom mode. We don't overreact. And we just really dig into some calm, logical conversations in and be curious about why you're hanging out with this new group of friends, or why you're dressing differently, or with the attitude thing. One of the things that I used to say to my kids was, hey, like, you're stressed, I can tell, how can I help you? And that was my way of being like, I see that you have attitude, without really saying it in a shameful, demeaning way, because we all get stressed. We all have attitude at some point, with each other. And so just having those calm, logical conversations. But at the end of the day, when I was wrapping up this conversation with my mom, I ended it and I said, listen, the fact that you notice that something is off, that's a win. May not feel like a win. You may be spiraling and you may be at chapter 10. You may need to take a breath. But at the same time, like, it's so good that you're so in tune with your kids that you noticed when they maybe veer off a path, or they're moving a certain way. And I think that's so, so important for parents to be that engaged with their kids and know when something is off. I hope this is helpful. Again, this was not medical or legal advice. This was just this mom and this conversation that I had. It took me back to so many moments of panic that I had in my own parenting journey, and I just wanted to address it. As always, keep fighting the good fight. Keep talking about all the things, and make sure that you're not going crazy parent mode or overreacting. You got this.
nextTalk is a 501c3 nonprofit keeping kids safe online. To support our work, make a donation at nexttalk.org. nextTalk resources are not intended to replace the advice of a trained healthcare or legal professional, or to diagnose, treat, or otherwise render expert advice regarding any type of medical, psychological, legal, financial, or other problem. You are advised to consult a qualified expert for your personal treatment plan.
Our nextTalk podcast is in the top 2% of over 3.4 million podcasts ranked by Listen Notes. But now we're also adding YouTube. So this is a whole new thing we're doing. If you could like, subscribe, and comment on these videos, it would help us so much. We appreciate y'all.